So your setup is going to be, I've got 140-pound Arches rough paper, and I'm going to work on the back side so it's more like cold press. And I'm going to practice the S Caress, and I've written that on there. And I'm going to do wet on dry. So basically you have your palette. I'm right-handed, so my palette's to my right. In between my palette and my paper, I like to have some sort of cloth or sponge or something to control the water on my brush. I could have it down here, I could have it above. I just want to have easy access to it. And then also to my right, I want to have my water container. I like 2 bins. I try to be disciplined and only clean with 1 bin. So I'm going to try to clean with this one and have this as clean water. All right, so I've got a round brush. This is a pretty large round brush. I just want to talk a minute about how to hold the brush. You don't want to do necessarily like a pencil that sort of limits your area of movement. I like to hold the brush, unless I'm doing real fine detail, kind of halfway or further back. I find I tend to hold it back here, and I don't quite hold it like a pencil. I like to get down almost flat. So sometimes you can hold it this way, you can get flatter that way. So you put your forefinger and your thumb and put the handle underneath you. So that's one way to do it. I tend to do it like this so that I have a real good firm grip with my forefinger and my thumb almost making a cross. And then the brush is braced up against my middle finger's first knuckle. That tends to be how I hold it. It's a real firm grip, and I try not to move my fingers as much as I move my arm and my wrist forward and back. So the movement's from the shoulder. I'm sitting down and I have less freedom of movement that way. I like to have my dabbing cloth in between my paper. I'm working flat. I'm not taping down. I just want to do the S Caress. So it's a name that I came up with. You won't see it in any book or anything, but it's a way I've come up with to describe the motion. So when you pull out paint, this is a combination of a little bit of blue and the more warm, most warm yellow. It's called Hansa Yellow Deep. And just a little bit of blue to brown it down a little bit. It looks an awful lot like yellow ochre. And I would say this is a milky consistency. And I'm going on dry paper, so I don't have anything to dilute it even more. Okay, so the S Caress, S describes the motion, the caress describes the pressure. So I want to get as flat as possible to the table, and I want to use the tip of the brush to define the edge of the shape. And I want to move in sort of an S motion, not necessarily going back and forth. And once I come off the page, I have to do something with my brush. Either clean it. See, I've used the wrong water source already. So now I'm going to load my brush. When you load the brush, don't just tip it in like this. Really scoop it on there like a shovel. I'm going to change color, and I'm going to slightly overlap this shape. I'm going to use the tip to find the edge of the shape, and I'm going to go right into that yellow. I'm going to use my S Caress motion, so I'm a real light touch. I'm just going to kind of go in an S motion back and forth. And once I come off the page, now I have to do something with my brush. Clean it off, get rid of the water. Maybe I want to soften an edge. So to soften an edge, I'm going to use the tip of the brush, get down flat and sort of tickle that edge back and use that same motion. Get all the water out of it so that you don't create a back run. Every time you come off the paper, do something with the brush. Clean it off. I'm just tickling that edge back. So this paint went into the wet. It was the same strength of pigment. This was milky and this was milky, so I shouldn't get a back run. I'll just get a bleed out. So we get a nice soft bleedy edge there. All right, so that's the S caress motion. What you don't, when I say the S caress in my mind, it's kind of like a mantra to keep me from doing this, worrying over the same spot and pressing too hard, pushing, coming up, going back, petting the painting. That worries the surface of the paper, and oftentimes you don't see, so you want to kind of avoid this slapping and petting your painting. Instead, be very gentle and just caress it in an S motion. You don't have to always go the same direction, and come around. So practice that a couple of times. Fill up the whole page. Just S caressing. Create an abstract design. Try to get rid of all the little white sparkles. We're going to talk about dry brushing. As soon as you start to run out of paint, reload your brush, go back in, and caress it some more. This keeps the paint really fresh. Really load the brush. I came off, so I have to start someplace new. I'm not going to worry the same spot. Once I come off the page, I have to do something. In this case, I'm going to reload my brush. And try to caress out all those light spots. So the rougher the paper, the more it grabs the hairs of your brush. So when I overlap, now this is drying off, so I'm going to get a hard edge. This is a bleed edge. Okay, you have to work pretty fast in our dry climate if you want to work wet into wet. So let's go back into the yellow. We'll glaze over the top. Glaze just means going over the top with a transparent color. So do you see that S caress motion? Once I come off the page, then I have to do something with my brush, so I added more paint. If I clean off, change color, I need a little more color. I want to try to keep it to the same consistency. I pull it out of the well and into the mixing area, and this is where I can tell how thick it is. So this is nice and shiny and still wet, so I'm going to go in so I get a soft edge there. Where this is dry, we'll see what the edges do. So that's the S caress, and I've used Ultramarine Light by Holbein. My goal is to get rid of all the little white sparkles. I don't want any white left. Every time I come off the page, I'm going to do something with my brush. So I have a little bit of overlapping, a little bit of color by itself. I'm going to go back in over this blue if I want to make this center shape a little darker. If I go back at this stage, I might get a softer edge than if I let it dry off completely. So let's put a shape. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a fish. I'm going to use the edge of my brush to define the shape. And then the side of my brush to fill in. Come off the paper, I got to do something with my brush. In this case, it was a reload. So I've just made that color darker by painting over the top of it again after it had dried back a little bit. Right, so that's my practice of the S caress, using a kind of a neutralized yellow and ultramarine light. Once this is dry, I'm going to write what colors I'm using on here. Okay, so that's the S caress. Another thing we want to be able to do is how to use the brush in a different way. So I'm going to create different stroke effects by varying how I hold the brush. So this is going to be, again, I'm going to work on the smoother side. So I'm going to write, this is going to be calligraphy strokes. And once again, I'm going to write on here 140-pound arches, rough, just so I know for later reference. And I'm going to use ultramarine blue. So I want to point out what's happening here is my yellow was weaker than my blue. So that is what happens when you do that, when you have weaker pigment on top of stronger pigment. When the pigment isn't dry, you're going to get that blossom edge. It's going to push the pigment to the edge of the shape. This is a bleed out. This is a back run. So knowing the difference, sometimes you like that effect. It can be distant hills, trees on a distant hill. Okay, so now let's do some calligraphy strokes. These aren't pretty, these are just fun. I like to get all my little pieces of stuff I can trip over to my left side because I'm right-handed. Okay, so I'm going to get some pretty strong paint of my ultramarine blue, and then I'm going to weaken it. So I want to be able to know how to get the pigment strength right. So the only way I can think, the best way to explain it is to think of tea and coffee and milk and butter, cream, jelly, you know, things we eat to kind of give us a sense of how thick we want it. So tea strength, in watercolor we want to work light to dark. So now I'm going to use what's called a pull stroke. So I'm going to get up now vertical on my brush, same hold. Now I'm going to just come vertical instead of horizontal with my brush. I'm going to get up close. I'm going to keep my wrist stiff, and I'm going to come in like an airport or an airplane landing. Can't really see because of my angle. So vertical to the paper, perpendicular to the paper. I'm going to come in, skim the surface, and then I'm going to push down, and then I'm going to come up. So that's the pull, push, pull stroke. So I'll do that again. So I'm going to come in just on the tip, and then I'm going to push in. Note that the handle of the brush always stays vertical or perpendicular to the paper. So that's a pull, push, pull. We can just do a pull all the way. That gives us a line. The higher you are on the tip, the thinner the line. You can do a curved line. You can do a pull, switch direction, push, and then pull off. I didn't have my brush fully loaded. Try that again. So do a pull, push, and then pull. Kind of gives you a bamboo leaf. So a pull, change direction, push down. See, I need to load my brush better. And then you can, it's kind of a straight, not much curve to it. So pull, push. What you don't want to do is change the angle of your brush. You want to keep it vertical. You can also pull, push, give it a little bit of an angle, and change direction. This is what we call a dry brush. It's a lot easier to achieve dry brush on a rough surface than it is on a smooth surface. So just practice those strokes. You can do this pull, push, change direction, and you can get kind of a grassy, long, wild grass. Now, I'm going to strengthen my pigment. So those are my back leaves and so forth. So now I can strengthen my pigment and do the same thing. So maybe I'll overlap these. They'll come from the same branch, and I can change the value, and I can go right across that wet spot, and I can start to get the more organic feel to my little design here. So this is what I would call milky pigment. Let's do the bamboo leaf coming off. Let's do a couple of line strokes. So if you turn the handle off, it gives a fatter line. Okay, let's strengthen the pigment even more. Get it to what the consistency of cream, and let's give one large branch over here, maybe dry brush off of there. Let's put some really strong leaves. Dry brushing. It's easier to dry brush with thicker paint. Let's have some coming from this direction. You don't want to do too many arches. So not so much this as one direction, stiff direction change. And don't worry about a design or anything. We're just trying to learn how to move the paint and vary the strength of the pigment. So at least 3. Let me repeat this. Let's do a couple. They're coming off this same branch and coming down. We've got 3 different values, and you can see the darker value feels like it's closer to us. And then if I want to fill in some gaps, I kind of like the dry brushing, but let's go ahead and give this one a branch with just a line stroke. Or we can do the side stroke. We can get back down on the side. We can create the bamboo edge. I'll show you that. Like the bamboo trunk, we kind of want to have varying strengths of pigment. So I'm going to put on this side kind of a watery flow, and I'm going to really sort of load that brush up. Tap it off a little bit. Now I'm going to go through the middle pigment, roll it around the belly of the brush, then I'm going to wipe the tip off, and I'm going to put a bamboo stroke here. This is the bamboo leaf. Probably shouldn't do it on this page. I got one more. I'll demonstrate that on this paper. So weak, middle strength, really strong on the tip. I'm going to get down as far as I can to horizontal. Find the smoother side of the paper. And I want to have pressure, and I want to do this side stroke. And then I'll come in here like this and do a little hitch, and then make the joint of the bamboo. And this is dry brushing. And then off of here we can do some line strokes. Nice and vertical. And put some bamboo strokes in there. Combine all our strokes. You want to think in terms of 3s. Get a nice brush load. I'm going to get some dark pigment now. And have we'll do a bamboo that's coming around the back. You can do a short little stroke. Let's do some that go up. You can do a slight little curve. And then we have a bamboo. If I want to buck up one side of it so it feels like one side is a little in shadow. There you go, there's a quick little bamboo thing. Maybe do some lighter strokes. Okay, so those are some calligraphy textures.